Dinner was served, but the atmosphere felt as heavy as lead. The moment my brother announced with a shaky voice that he was moving to the house we once called home, my world crumbled around me. I had been counting the days since our mother passed away, and the now empty house seemed to scream for memories. The betrayal cut deep. My brother was taking not just his bags, but what little remained of our bond. I wondered when everything had turned into a distant memory. My name is Alana. This house no longer belongs to me, but what remains of us? Anger simmered inside me, intertwined with a profound sadness that I didn't know how to express. I looked at Eduardo, who appeared so calm, as if he were merely announcing a vacation rather than the destruction of everything we had built together. I remembered when we were kids, running through the backyard, crafting stories and creating a world just for us. But now, in that dining room, he felt like a stranger to me. I always saw the house as a refuge, a place that kept our ties intact. What would happen to that, now that he was determined to leave? Claudia tried to ease the tension in the air, her gentle voice betraying her own concern. She had always been the mediator, the one who pieced together the broken fragments of our family. "Eduardo, think carefully," she said, her gaze darting between me and him as if trying to measure the impact of her words. "Are you sure this is the best decision?" The silence that followed was thick, as if the air was heavy with unspoken words, with feelings hovering in the room, waiting for a chance to be acknowledged. I wanted to scream, to make him feel the pain I felt. "Eduardo, don't you see what you're doing?" My voice came out louder than I intended, and all eyes turned to me. "You're just running away, running from responsibility, from our family." What I really wanted to say was that he was leaving me behind, that his departure meant a drastic change in everything I knew. Eduardo's expression hardened, and I saw a spark of anger flicker in his eyes. "It's not about that, Alana. You don't understand. I need to live my life." His words cut deep, and I felt like a child again, small and powerless. What he didn't see was that my life was crumbling too. "You can live your life here, by my side. We could work through this together," I protested, trying to prevent the conversation from escalating into a war. Roberto, who had seemed lost in his own thoughts, finally spoke, his deep, calm voice trying to bring some logic to the chaos. "Eduardo, your sister is right. Moving away doesn't just mean leaving a place. You're distancing yourself from us, from your family. Are you sure this is what you really want?" It was hard not to feel a wave of hope hearing my father. He had always been the silent pillar of our family, the one who brought a rational perspective when the storm began. But I knew the situation was more complicated than any of us could imagine. Eduardo looked at Roberto, hesitating for a moment, but soon determination returned to his face. "I need to find myself. I can't stay here living a life that isn't mine." Desperation began to take hold of me. "And what happens to us? What do you mean by 'it's not your life'? We are your life." The words came out with a strength I didn't know I had, but I immediately realized that this could make things even worse. Claudia, sensing that the discussion was about to escalate, intervened again. "Eduardo, we all want what's best for you, but maybe there's a way for you to explore your options without completely severing the ties we have." Her hope was fading, but I wanted to believe there was a solution, that Eduardo could see the value in staying and fighting alongside us. However, my brother's distant gaze spoke louder than any words. He seemed resolute, as if he had already made his choice. I remembered the last time we were all together on a family trip, laughing and telling stories around the campfire. The memories were vivid, and I wished I could go back to that time when there were no doubts between us, when love and security were guaranteed. Now, every passing second seemed to push that past further away, as if we were all trapped in a maze, searching for an exit but failing to find one. "What are you going to do when you're gone? How will you deal with all of this?" I forced myself to ask, trying to keep the conversation from turning into a personal attack. Eduardo sighed, and I saw his expression shift, a glimpse of doubt crossing his face. I don't know, Alana. I just know I have to try. I can't stay stuck here. His answer was a blow, and I realized that deep down, he was also grappling with his own fears. Still, the idea of loss weighed more heavily than any relief that moving might bring him. The conversation dragged on, each of us trying to express our point of view, but the truth was that it wasn't getting us anywhere. The house, a silent witness to our exchanges, seemed to echo the fragility of our bonds. By the end of the night, when voices fell silent and the tension didn't seem to ease, I knew that the change Eduardo planned wasn't just geographical. It was a life change that challenged everything we knew. And so, as I looked at each of us, I realized that regardless of what happened next, nothing would be the same. The battle for our unity was just beginning, and the future was filled with uncertainties. The silence lingered at the table, and I felt the weight of every gaze fixed on Eduardo. He seemed oblivious to the emotional burden he had unleashed, or perhaps he was just bracing himself for the repercussions. For me, everything was changing rapidly. The image of a always-there brother began to fade, replaced by the uncertainty of what his absence would mean. Claudia, my mother, who had always strived to balance our personalities and avoid conflicts, was now trying to find words to bring some comfort. Her hope was clear, as if the mere mention of the move could be reversed with a touch of magic. I knew her intentions were pure, but the worried look she cast at Eduardo only reinforced the fragility of the situation. "Eduardo," I finally said, trying not to let frustration take over, "why didn't you discuss this with us before making this decision?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded with hidden meanings. Looking at him, I realized the answer wouldn't come easily. Eduardo looked down, and I felt an urge to protect our relationship, even as anger boiled inside me. "It's just a new city," he said, almost as if trying to downplay the gravity of what was really at stake. But it wasn't just a city. It was the promise of a different life, a life where he wouldn't be part of our daily lives anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was drifting away from me, not just physically, but emotionally. Roberto, my father, who had always been the peacemaker, decided to step in. "Maybe we should listen to what Eduardo has to say," he suggested, his voice calm and soothing, like a balm for my restless spirit. "Changes can be hard, but sometimes they are necessary." He spoke with the wisdom I had always admired, but even so, his words weren't enough to soothe my pain. I wanted to scream. I wanted everyone to understand that Eduardo's decision felt like a betrayal. My brother, who had been my confidant during so many important moments, was now about to become a stranger, and that was unbearable. "I just wanted something different," Eduardo replied, finally looking up at me, and I noticed a mix of fear and determination in his eyes. "Nothing against you, but I feel like I need a fresh start." His words, though sincere, resonated like an empty echo, lacking the solidity I needed. What he was seeking was something I couldn't comprehend. I found myself reminiscing about the moments we grew up together, the promises we made to always stand by each other, and now it all felt so fragile. The table between us, which should have symbolized unity, now felt like a chasm. Claudia, sensing the intensity of the conversation, decided to try a new angle. "What if we could help in some way?" she said, making an effort to lighten the mood. "Maybe you can go, but you will always have a home here, Eduardo. The door will always be open." It was a hopeful speech, but I felt she was trying to cover up a harsh reality. Eduardo's absence wouldn't just be physical. The family dynamic would change forever. The look in Claudia's eyes, though filled with love, couldn't hide the concern consuming her. "I don't want this to end like this," I said, my voice almost faltering. "I don't want you to go." The desperation in my voice was palpable, and I knew everyone at the table could feel the tension. The idea of losing Eduardo was becoming a reality I didn't know how to handle. The silence that followed was so thick it could be cut with a knife. The expression on Eduardo's face twisted, as if he were battling an internal storm. He knew his decision was affecting all of us, and the weight of our pain seemed heavier on his shoulders. "I just want you to support me," he finally murmured, and the words echoed in me. The expectation of support in his voice made my heart ache. It was as if he were asking for understanding, even when I felt everything was crumbling around us. Pride and resentment danced an uncomfortable tango, and I wondered if we could find common ground. "I want to be happy, and that's important to me," Eduardo added, his vulnerability opening a crack in my heart. "Happiness can't be built on the pain of others," I replied, a mix of anger and sadness in my voice. "Don't you see that you're leaving us behind?" Roberto, sensing that the conversation was escalating, looked at me with an expression that begged for calm. "Alana, maybe we should take some time to process all of this," he suggested, but it was too late. The feeling of betrayal and loss was ingrained in each of us, and the night dragged on, marked by a heavy silence and an uncertainty that loomed over our table. As the hours passed and dinner became a mere ritual, I realized that the real battle wasn't just about accepting change, but about finding a way to maintain the connection that still remained between us. Our family story was about to be rewritten, and I didn't know if I would be able to accept the new plot Eduardo was drawing. With every bite of food I could barely swallow, I felt the pain of an uncertain future, where his presence would be just a memory, and our sibling bond would be a distant echo of times that would never return. And so, as the night wore on, I realized that the fight for reconciliation was just beginning, and I was determined not to let it all end in an agonizing silence. The love we had, though shaken, still deserved a chance. The table was filled with dishes that once brought celebration, but in that moment, everything felt tasteless. I looked at Eduardo, who still hadn't noticed the intensity of my gaze, lost in his own thoughts. I remembered how, on other occasions, our laughter filled the room, creating a light atmosphere that now seemed impossible. The tension was palpable, like a thread about to snap, and all I could think was that this wasn't how I wanted to say goodbye to my brother. Claudia, trying to steer the conversation to something more neutral, asked questions about the new city, but Eduardo's response felt distant, almost automatic. He talked about opportunities, about new beginnings, but his words didn't touch the truth of how I felt, as if he were speaking of someone else, of another life, and not ours. At any moment, I expected Roberto to intervene, bringing some balance to the situation, but he seemed just as lost as we were. His gaze shifted between us, as if trying to decipher a riddle none of us could solve. The fragility of the moment made everything even more distressing, and I couldn't remain silent. "Eduardo, you can't just walk away like this," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "What will happen to us, to our family?" He turned his head in my direction, surprise etched on his face, as if I were breaking a taboo he had set. Claudia tried to intervene again, asking us to be more respectful of one another, but I could no longer control the avalanche of emotions that was flooding me. Respectful? How can I be respectful when you're leaving me behind? The words came out harsher than I intended, and I could see the pain in Eduardo's eyes. His expression changed. Now it was no longer just indifference. There was sadness and perhaps a hint of guilt. "That's not how I want you to see this, Alana. I just need to move on. I can't stay stuck here." "Stuck? You think you're stuck? I'm the one who's always been here, taking care of things, while you had the freedom to live your life. And now, when I finally thought we could have some time just for us, you decide to leave?" Indignation flooded my voice, and I felt the anger boiling within me. Eduardo shook his head, as if trying to understand my perspective, but there was no time for that. Dinner was completely lost. What had once been a family meal had now turned into an emotional battlefield. Roberto finally spoke, his voice calm but heavy with a weight that made the air around us feel denser. "Children, we can resolve this civilly. Eduardo, you can explain why this change is so important to you." He tried to be the mediator, but I knew the tension in the air was stronger than any diplomacy he could offer. Eduardo sighed, looking more tired than before, and began to talk about his professional aspirations, about how he felt he needed a new environment to grow. But his words began to dissolve into a distant hum as I lost myself in my own thoughts. "And what do you expect from me? That I stay here and just accept your decision?" I asked, with a growing sadness in my chest. "You don't care about what this means for me. Our home, our childhood, all of this is falling apart, and you're just leaving." At that moment, the truth of how I felt overflowed, like a glass brimming with water. Part of me wanted him to stay, but there was also another part that understood his need to explore the world outside those four walls. "I never wanted to hurt you, Alana," Eduardo replied, his voice now quieter, almost a whisper. He looked at me with sincerity, and something inside me softened, if only for a brief moment. Life is short, and I need to figure out who I am away from all this. That doesn't mean I don't care about you. If I can, I'll come back to visit. That promise felt fragile, like a thread of hope amidst despair. Claudia, realizing that the conversation was heading down a difficult path, decided to intervene again. "Eduardo, you will always be in our hearts, no matter the distance. We are family, and family is something that binds us, even when we're far away." Calming the atmosphere, Roberto suggested that we try to think of a way to celebrate this new phase in Eduardo's life, something that would unite us instead of dividing us. I looked at him and saw the effort he was making to maintain our family's unity. For a moment, I thought there might be a way to accept the change. Perhaps it didn't mean the end, but the beginning of something different. I took a deep breath, and despite the pain, I decided I was willing to try. "Maybe we can plan a farewell, something that involves all of us. One last moment before you leave, Eduardo." Eduardo smiled, and I noticed that despite everything, he still had hope. The conversation, though painful, was beginning to transform into something that could be built upon. Claudia and Roberto watched us, and deep down, I knew we were, in some way, starting to mend the fractures life had created between us. Dinner hadn't ended the way I expected, but perhaps it was possible to find a new path, even if it was painful and filled with uncertainties. And so, in that fragile moment, with a mix of anger and love, I realized that even with Eduardo's departure, our story wasn't over yet. Eduardo's words still echoed in my mind, and I tried to comprehend the magnitude of that change. The anger that initially consumed me now mingled with a sense of loss. I looked at Claudia, who was trying to soften the tension with a nervous smile, and at Roberto, whose features carried a mix of understanding and concern. I knew they were just as shaken as I was, but my pain felt exclusive and deep. The idea that Eduardo was drifting away wasn't just about physical distance. It was about an emotional gap that would become increasingly difficult to ignore. "Why now, Eduardo?" I asked, my voice coming out softer than I intended. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" The silence that followed was deafening as I sought a look that would confirm he understood the depth of my frustration. But he looked away, as if every word he said could worsen the situation. "I didn't want to hurt you, Alana," he finally replied, his voice trembling. "I just thought it would be a good opportunity, a fresh start." His last words resonated within me like a curse. A fresh start? What did that mean for me? I didn't want him to have a fresh start away from me, away from the family we built together. Claudia intervened, trying to calm the situation. "Eduardo, dear, maybe you can explain your plan, what you hope to find in the new city." She had always been the mediator, the person trying to keep balance even when everything around us seemed to crumble. I admired her ability to act this way, but in that moment, her presence only heightened my dissatisfaction. Why did someone have to move? Things were going so well, or at least I wanted to believe they were. "The new city has better job opportunities, and I want to explore that," Eduardo explained, as if he were selling an idea. each of his phrases felt like an attempt to convince not only us, but also himself that his decision was the best. My heart tightened at the thought that he was launching into a future that didn't include my presence. And what happens to us? What happens to our family? The question slipped from my lips before I could think better. Roberto, who had remained silent until then, looked at me, his eyes reflecting the same pain I felt. I knew he was thinking about the impact the move would have on all of us. "I will always be here, just a phone call away," Eduardo assured, but his words brought no comfort. In one day, he was present in the small things of everyday life. The next, he would become a distant memory, a voice on the phone that could not replace the shared moments. The void his departure would leave was undeniable. "That's not how it works, Edu." I could feel my voice rising, but I couldn't help it. "It's not just a phone call. You'll be far from home, far from us." The frustration exploded within me, as if I were trying to hold water in a sieve. "You don't understand how hard this is for me." Claudia ran her hand through her hair, visibly stressed by the situation. "Let's try to calm down. We're all feeling the pressure, and this isn't helping." Her voice was a plea for reason, but I was already beyond reason. The idea of losing my brother, of seeing our dynamic change, was like an open wound. At the same time, a part of me felt selfish for not supporting his aspirations. "You can't just leave, Eduardo," I declared, trying to maintain my composure. "We've always been together, faced everything together. What will become of us?" I felt Claudia's eyes welling up with tears, but I couldn't worry about that right now. The world around me felt like it was crumbling, and all I wanted was for him to understand the weight of his decision. "I know it's hard, Alana, but I need to do this for myself," he said, his voice firmer but still sad. Understanding his perspective was a challenge, and the vision of the future he saw felt distant and unreal. I wanted to scream, and at the same time, I wanted to hug him. In that moment, the love I felt for him and the pain of his decision were in conflict, creating a storm inside me that I didn't know how to dissipate. Roberto finally intervened, his voice deep and full of authority. "Eduardo, you need to understand that this affects all of us. This isn't just a change for you, it's a change for the family. We need to talk about this, think together about what this decision means." His words were an invitation to reflection, but Eduardo seemed to still trapped in his own vision of the future. The atmosphere at the table was tense, and the food that had once seemed delicious was now forgotten. Each of us wrestled with our own feelings, trying to find an understanding that seemed increasingly distant. The truth was that I didn't want him to leave, but at the same time, I couldn't be responsible for tying him to something he didn't want. The dilemma between love and freedom was about to become unbearable. "I just want you to know that regardless of your decision, I'll be here for you," I tried to say, but the weakness in my voice betrayed the bravery I wanted to project. Eduardo nodded, but I couldn't interpret his expression. The conversation was moving toward a deadlock, and I felt that the family we knew was about to fragment. Amidst all of this, the only thing I knew was that the pain of his departure would be a heavy burden to carry. I looked at Claudia, hoping she would take the initiative to calm the spirits, but she seemed lost in her own thoughts, a look of concern hovering on her face. Eduardo's fork lightly tapped against the plate, breaking the heavy silence that had settled in the room. "You don't understand. I need this," he finally said, his voice trembling slightly. "It's an opportunity for me, and I can't let it pass." His words felt like a distant echo of the freedom I had longed for when I was younger, a freedom that now sounded like a blow to my heart. I had always seen Eduardo as a partner in my adventures, an ally in childhood mischief, and now he presented himself as someone breaking the bonds we had built over the years. My stomach turned as I realized that his change wasn't just geographical. It was a transformation in our family dynamic, a new reality I didn't want to accept. But what about us? What about our family? I couldn't hold back, and the words came out with more fervor than I intended. You're throwing all of this away, as if it no longer matters. Each syllable felt like a silent scream, and I immediately realized I had crossed a line by touching on such a delicate point. Eduardo frowned, and his gaze transformed into a mix of frustration and sadness. That's not how it works, Alana. I'm not abandoning you. I'm just trying to find my path. I could see the wound this conversation was causing him, and at the same time, I felt a burning anger inside me. How could I be understanding when what was at stake was my emotional security? Claudia took a deep breath, trying to intervene. Eduardo, please consider what this means for your sister, she said in a gentle but firm voice. Roberto, who had maintained a neutral expression until then, finally spoke up. Maybe we should discuss this calmly, without accusations. What Eduardo is doing is something many young people go through. His words, though well-intentioned, only heightened my frustration. How could he be so understanding of Eduardo when I felt like a stranger in my own home? I knew Roberto had his reasons, but the comfort I expected from him felt distant. The conversation began to diverge, emotions reaching a peak that I didn't know how to control. It's not about being young or old, Dad. It's about what this means for us, for our story. Eduardo remained silent, and the tension grew, filling every inch of the air around us. Dinner was completely abandoned. The plates of food had become mere objects, lifeless, as if reflecting the state of our family. With every breath, the anguish intensified, and I couldn't prevent my mind from drifting to the happiest memories that now seemed so far away. I remembered the afternoons we played together in the backyard, the laughter we shared, and the promises that nothing would change. Now, all of that felt like a lost dream in time. I just wanted you to understand, Alana, this isn't a move against you. It's just something I need to do. Eduardo spoke again, his voice softer but loaded with emotion. I was torn between the pain of his departure and the desire to support him, but the thought of seeing him distant was like losing a part of myself, the connection we always believed we had. And if I need you, and if you're not here when I need a brother? The words slipped out of me unfiltered, and I immediately regretted it, realizing I might be pressing the wrong button. Eduardo's gaze softened, and for a moment, frustration gave way to vulnerability. I will always be here, even if I'm far away. I'm just trying to grow, Alana. Tears began to slide down my face, and I quickly wiped them away, embarrassed to show weakness. Claudio stood up and approached us, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. Let's remember that family is more than physical proximity. The love and support will still be there no matter the distance. Her words were true. But they couldn't erase the feeling of betrayal consuming me. I wanted to believe that everything would be okay, but doubt settled in my heart like an unwelcome tenant. The idea that everything could change was terrifying, and I didn't know how to deal with it. Eduardo looked at me with an expression that asked for understanding, but I wasn't sure if I could give that to him at that moment. The tension from the conversation still hung in the air when dinner finally came to an end, and we all stood up from the table, immersed in our own thoughts. The atmosphere was charged, and I knew nothing would be the same. The future seemed uncertain, and the desire for reconciliation mingled with the pain of separation. I wondered if we could overcome this new phase, or if our family was doomed to divide. With an immense weight in my chest, I realized that the journey was just beginning, and I would have to find a way to accept the changes that were approaching. If you've faced difficult changes in your family life, share your experiences, and let's try to find a path toward reconciliation and understanding together. The silence in the room was so thick I could hear everyone's breathing. Claudia was trying to look away, as if that could mitigate the tension that hung in the air. I looked at Eduardo, but he seemed distant, as if he were already in another city, in another place. I felt a knot form in my throat as I realized that my life, our life, was about to change irrevocably. The table was covered with dishes and glasses, but the true feast seemed to be the silent struggle among us. Eduardo, with his determined gaze, awaited our reaction, while I struggled to organize the words that wanted to escape me like birds in a cage. Eduardo, you can't just decide this without considering all of us, I finally said, my voice rising higher than I expected. What will happen to our family? Are you just going to disappear? The echo of my question floated through the room, and I could see Claudia's eyes widen, trying to prevent an explosion that was already in progress. Roberto, for his part, seemed to be wrestling with the urge to intervene, his gaze shifting between me and Eduardo, unsure of whom to support at that moment. The tension was palpable, like a thread about to snap. Eduardo, however, did not retreat. That's not how I see things, Alana. This isn't about leaving family behind. It's about starting my own life. I need this, he replied, his tone firm, but his voice nearly faltering at the end. The truth was that I couldn't understand how he could be so certain of his decision. At that moment, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. I was the older sister, the one who always protected him, and now it felt like he was drifting away, not just physically, but emotionally. "And when you come back, what will be left of us?" I asked, knowing that my words were harsh. But the pain I felt needed to be expressed. "We're all here, and you want to leave us behind as if we were just a phase in your life?" Claudia, sensing the situation escalating, tried to intervene. "Let's talk about this calmly, everyone. Eduardo, could you explain your reasons better?" Her tone was soft, almost pleading, but I knew that Mom couldn't keep the peace forever. "It's not an easy decision," Eduardo said, and his hands trembled slightly. "But I feel like I need to step away to discover who I really am. I'm no longer the kid who lived his whole life in this house. It's time for me to pursue my own dreams." To assert that felt like a punch to my gut, and I felt a wave of despair wash over me. I wasn't just losing a brother, I was feeling the loss of a part of myself, of the connection we always believed we had. "Dreams? What about us?" I countered, my gaze fixed on his face. "Do you think one person's dreams can be more important than our family? We're all in this together. And you want to leave like it's just another decision?" Eduardo looked away, and in that instant, I realized that the trust that once existed between us was fading. The atmosphere was heavy with the unsaid, and the fear of the future became more real with each passing second. "Alana, I don't want you to feel this way," he said, his voice softer. "You've always been my biggest supporter, and I want you to be by my side, even from a distance. I just hope you understand." Tears threatened to escape, and I fought against them, not wanting to show weakness in front of Eduardo. I needed to be strong, not just for myself, but to maintain the integrity of our family, which seemed on the verge of shattering. "The truth is, I don't understand, Eduardo, and maybe you'll never be able to make me understand," I declared, my heart heavy. The look in Claudia's eyes was pure desperation, and I realized that Mom was trying to find a way to unite the pieces that were breaking before her. Roberto finally intervened, with a tone that was almost paternal. "Maybe what we all need to do right now is listen to each other. Each of us has our own concerns. Eduardo, you're doing what you think is right, but we also need to discuss what this means for the rest of us." A heavy silence filled the room as we all reflected on Roberto's words. The idea of listening, of truly hearing one another, felt distant, but it was the only way for us to find a path. What I wanted more than anything was for Eduardo to look back and see that even with the changes ahead, he would always have a place here among us. Family love shouldn't be a starting point, but the foundation on which he could build his new life. "Maybe I should have talked about this earlier," said Eduardo, breaking the silence. "I just thought that if I said I was leaving, the pain would be less." The sincerity in his words surprised me, and something inside me began to loosen. "We will always be a family," he continued. "And even if I'm far away, that doesn't change how I feel about you." The weight of those words echoed in my heart, and for the first time, I realized that change, while painful, didn't mean the end of everything. It was a new beginning, perhaps not as I expected, but still a beginning.